did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
And welcome to the House of Asher. This is your host, Steve Asher, and this is actually episode 91, I believe. We're running, getting close up to that 100. It seems like it was just yesterday that we started this. If you're listening, most likely you're listening to this on Spreaker.com. It's also available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, and later on my YouTube channel, House of Asher. Also, please do check out StevieAsher.com, where you can find out more information about the show, my books, appearances, whatnot. Puppet show. I don't have a puppet show. I should do a puppet show. Maybe later. But the guy that we're going to have on in just a moment, he is no puppet, but he is a heck of a show. And we're going to get to this fine gentleman right after this commercial break. Robert Riggi, a Peoria, Illinois native, is a psychic medium with over 50 years' experience within the paranormal field, in addition to the 35 years' experience as a forensic psychologist. Robert has been involved in 2 exorcisms, both sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago. Riggi is a mentor of 10 children of the paranormal, instructing them, teaching them in the ways of their gifts and their talents and how to use them most wisely. Robert volunteers at a hospice, ministering to the children and their families, seeing to their needs. He assists these young children in their transition from this earthly dimension to the heavenly dimension. Mr. Riggi's mantra is, "We are all spiritual beings in a physical body." Robert Riggi talks to the children about the angels that are always around them in times of need. All of the services he does are always free of charge. Robert is available for both public and private events. He has given many readings in person as well as over the telephone. Mr. Riggi has been on many podcasts, such as House of Asher, Trapper John Touched by Heaven, as well as several programs in the United Kingdom. If you need any assistance or information concerning anything paranormal, he urges you to please contact him at 309-213-0325. All right, everybody, that was Camo Trooper that you heard coming back in from the commercial, and welcome back to the show. This gentleman that I'm getting ready to talk to you about, extremely cool guy, very personable guy. I've followed this guy for a while, and he was so gracious to come on the show and talk to us, and it's blowing my mind. I'll do a quick little bio on this gentleman. Robert W Sullivan IV. He is a Freemason, historian, philosopher, writer, antiquarian, lay theologian, mystic, jurist, radio and TV personality, as well as a best-selling author, CEO, and attorney. Good guy. When does he sleep? That's probably the first questions I will have for you, Robert. Hey, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me on House of Asher. It's a pleasure to be here. Always was a big fan of the Vincent Price House of Usher movies, so House of Asher definitely resonates. Thank you for having me on.
Well, that was my kind of ham-fisted honor to Mr. Vincent. I actually have a signed picture of him behind me on my wall. I look like, think of like any clubhouse from like the 1980s, where kids have like monster posters on the wall and UFO stuff, and that's kind of what my little studio looks like. It looks like it's a 15 or 16-year-old's clubhouse from the 1980s and 70s. So
yeah, you're preaching to the choir. I have some movie posters as well. I used to, as a kid, built the Aurora model kits, so it's all near and dear to me as well.
Oh, those were awesome. And I like the fact that there were so many, like you said, of the early monsters. And then, do you remember when they had like the UFO models?
Yeah, vaguely. I was more into I built the classic monsters, like the Mummy and Dracula and Frankenstein and those. But I do remember them having the UFO ones as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that was when I first got into reading, which I'm dyslexic, and so it took me a while. And a friend of mine showed me some comic books, and I always had an interest in ghosts and goblins. And I'm in Western Kentucky. They call them haints and boogers here. So. Yeah, it's not as pretty, but that's just regional. But anyway, and so yeah, I got into that, and I had older brothers, and we would watch creature features and stuff like that with all the local horror hosts, and they'd have whatever, the Mummy and Black Cat and Bride of Frankenstein and just all those, plus a lot of kind of schlocky, not even a B movie, like a B minus movie or something, but
Oh, sure.
but they were great, and
Oh, absolutely.
and they drew me in. And what was so funny is that you know even because you would see different things in comics and in also movies, and the older that you got, the more that you start kind of going, oh well, hey, that thing in the background, that's sort of, isn't it whatever symbol, maybe that's a pentagram describing something, or the way that they have these people lined up, it's kind of more of a like goddess Diana type, hints of whatever. What got you into all that? Because I mean, obviously, with all the stuff that you have going on, especially being an attorney, what drew you to that sort of curious side of symbolism?
Right, right. I'm very much like you. I was born in 1971, and I grew up in a time prior to the internet and 300 cable channels and all that. I mean, even when cable eventually came, it was only I think 36 channels or so. And we had the same thing here. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. We had the same thing here. We had a show on at night. It was aired every Saturday night called Ghost Host. And the guy who was actually the host of it, I can't remember his name, but he was a host of a children's after-school television program called Captain Chesapeake. Ghost Host and Captain Chesapeake were one and the same person. And just like you, I watched all the old Universal horror movies, The Mummy, The Black Cat, The Raven, Dracula, all those. And then, the ones from the 60s, with Vincent Price and even the ones from the 70s. And oh yeah, absolutely. The Hammer, the Hammer Mummy movies, and of course the Hammer Dracula movies and all that good stuff. And I was always, as a kid, just fascinated by film. I always loved it. I grew up on Star Wars. I mean, that came out when I was about 5, 6 years old, the first one. And I just really loved movies. I loved horror movies, and it really wasn't until probably somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, when, coming of age, going to college, and, you start researching the movies more. And for me, it was when I was researching Star Wars and watching Star Wars, I came to discover that it was really a study in comparative mythology, that Lucas relied heavily on a book by a guy named Joseph Campbell to create this comparative mythological space opera based on these ancient myths. And this was something that was somewhat well known. Lucas admits to this. I mean, this isn't any state secret at this point in time. But that always fascinated me, and it got me interested into this. Well, if Lucas is doing it, maybe some other filmmakers are doing it as well. And when I was writing my first book, The Royal Arch of Enoch, I wanted to end that book. This was a book about Masonic history. I wanted to end that book on up to speed, bring it up to the 21st century. So I started talking about Masonic and esoteric emblems, but pretty much Masonic symbolism in film. And it's really movies such as like the first National Treasure movie, which is literally, Steve, a Masonic ritual put to film. And then it was, at the turn of the millennium, you had this tidal wave of these Gnostic movies coming out about self-awakening and false realities and alternative realities, like The Matrix and Vanilla Sky and Exorcist. Right, and you just had these waves of these Gnostic films coming out, and that's really what got the ball rolling on it. And I just started, like I said, I'll just wrap up on this. Was the Royal Arch of Enoch was a product of 20 years of applying this study that I had conducted into the occult, mysticism, symbolism, and I essentially turned this 20 years on Hollywood, and just instead of applying it to cityscapes and Masonic symbolism and architecture, I applied it to film. And so far, I've produced 2 books about it, and a third is on the way. Right. This is something I talked about in the first book. The Book of Enoch, one Enoch, the Ethiopian Enoch. This book is lost. It's a book left out of the Bible. It's lost from around the 2nd, 3rd century, all the way up to 1773. until a man by the name of James Bruce, who you just mentioned, returned from Ethiopia with 3 copies of it. Up until then, it was lost to history. And it was not even translated into English until 1821. Three copies. He kept one. One went to a library in France, and the other one went to the Bodleian Library at Oxford University. This is the most famous edition. This is the one that was translated into English in 1821. And this is really the thesis of my first book, which was that this Book of Enoch, this lost apocryphal text, was being incorporated in the cultivation of the Masonic high degrees in the 1740s, 1750s, when the book was technically, according to mainstream historians, lost to history. And this book and this Masonic ritual, the ritual is actually named after the biblical patriarch. It's called the Royal Arch of Enoch. It is really, when you come to understand it, it's a very deep study. It's a very long and dragged out talking point. So I'll try to condense it as quickly as I can. But it's really this high degree ritual and ceremonial that is being used, that so much of the philosophy, so much of the symbolism, especially in a Masonic context, is coming out of. And it's really a lot of the mythos and philosophy of this ritual that's being used to craft the United States around. So it's very critical, but it's not only critical in that aspect, it's critical that it presents a historical anomaly. That is, that there must have been a copy of this book out there somewhere in Europe at some point in time that these guys who are fashioning this ritual must have had access to. No, what happens is the Freemasonry proper as it exists today is crafted in 1717. That's when it officially comes on the history pages. Naturally, there were Masonic guilds, craft guilds operating in Europe prior to that date. The Rosicrucians are sort of proto Masons. It's a more of a philosophy than it is a group that ties in alchemy, which is essentially for them the transmutation of ignorance into wisdom. Think base metal to gold. So it's more of a Rosicrucianism. Rosicrucianism should be thought of as more of a proto-Enlightenment movement. And they exist prior to the Masons, but Masons incorporate a lot of their elements. And then in 1717, you have the Blue Lodge, quote unquote, officially come onto the scene. And this is the first 3 degrees of Masonry: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master Mason. It's not until 1737 that a guy by the name of Andrew Michael the Chevalier Ramsay comes along, and he gives this oration that sort of guides the Masonic history into a new direction. In 1721, a man named James Anderson publishes the Constitutions of the Freemasons, and he gives this legendary history of Masonry. And Ramsay skews it, where Anderson takes it back to biblical stoneworkers. Ramsay takes it to Roman Catholicism and basically says Masonry is a product of the Knights Templars. And it's from his oration in the 1740s, 1750s that the high degrees are crafted. It's what's originally known as the Rite of Perfection. And arguably one of the most important degrees, I think it is the most important degrees, is this 13th degree called the Royal Arch of Enoch. And it's a long story, but you have to understand what's going on inside the Blue Lodge, especially in the third degree ritual, and then what's going on in this 13th degree with the Royal Arch of Enoch. It has to do with what was lost in the Blue Lodge is found in this high degree ritual. And this is at the rite of perfection. This is what ultimately becomes the Scottish Rite and the York Rite of Freemasonry in the United States around the 1800s and the early 1800s. And like I said, the thesis that I present in the book is that this ritual, this original Rite of Perfection ritual, is incorporating elements of the Lost Book of Enoch, years before the book was quote unquote, restored to mainstream history. So that's really why it's so critical. And like I said, it's known in the United States, and it's really the ceremonial that is being turned to, that a lot of the philosophies and a lot of the symbolism are coming out of when it comes to crafting the United States around. The Golden Dawn is much later. They're more 19th century. They're more Victorian, and they are what I would call Masonic-like. But they are not really affiliated in any way to Freemasonry proper. Yeah, absolutely. No, he is a Freemason. He was Grand Master of the state of Pennsylvania, a very prominent Freemason. And he did, there is strong evidence to suggest that Franklin was a agent or double agent working with the British government, believe it or not. He had a code name, I believe, which was Moses in the British intelligence operation. And it was code number 72. Was what Franklin, I think, was known as. He may have been known as Moses also. But the Hellfire Club of Francis Dashwood was another one of these esoteric secret society offshoots that Franklin did attend meetings with. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest that this continued on with through the 19th century and early 20th century. A lot of these esoteric orders were stomping grounds for intelligence and counterintelligence operatives to sort of penetrate society. And you could move within a country's how could you say, upper echelon by attending these meetings of secret societies. So the secret societies were almost like a stomping ground for spies, espionage, counter-espionage. Franklin was, without question, a Mason. And there is evidence to suggest that he was actually employed by British intelligence. Or alternatively, you could look at it that he was working with the Americans as almost like a triple double agent, if that even makes sense, working where the British intelligence thought he was working with them, but he was actually working against them. Aleister Crowley did the same thing in the late 19th, early 20th century. Many people thought he was an agent of the German government and that he was working for German intelligence, where actually he was working with British intelligence and was exploiting the people he knew in German intelligence, which was likely what Franklin was doing. But the Hellfire Club of Dashwood was attended by many people in the British intelligence apparatus. And yeah, Franklin definitely attended meetings in the Hellfire Club in the caves beneath Dashwood's estate, no question about it. Well, that's right. I in the Royal Arch of Enoch book, I have a chapter actually called the United States of Freemasonry, where I argue that the United States is really the first Masonic republic, and I think that's pretty irrefutable. I mean, the Constitution, the triple division of government, comes from Blue Lodge Freemasonry, the triple division of governance in a Blue Lodge between a worshipful master and two wardens. Of course, this becomes the legislative, judicial, and executive branches in the government. In Anderson's constitutions, you will find the raw material that became the separation of church and state. And of course, that you'll find in the United States Constitution. And as you have correctly pointed out, many of the founders of this country, founding fathers such as Washington and Franklin, were Freemasons. And they knew essentially what they didn't want. They didn't want a monarchy, and they didn't want a Vatican-styled operation. So they were all members of this egalitarian secret society that was preaching democracy, that was promoting equality. So let's turn to that. Why not? Let's use that to model a country around. And essentially, that's exactly what they did. And I think it's a very easy argument to make that the United States is the world's first Masonic republic. And like I said, if you're interested in that, by all means, read the Royal Arch of Enoch book. I have a whole chapter on it. Well, that's right. I mean, George Washington had the famous line, "I didn't defeat George III to become George the First." And up until really Washington, what Washington did was unheard of. Up until then, the general of the revolutionary forces that was victorious always seized control, whether it be Oliver Cromwell or Napoleon Bonaparte. The general who led the military forces that was victorious essentially installed himself as the de facto military dictator. And you'll find, Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, Oliver Cromwell. I mean, and everybody figured the same thing, that once Washington defeated the British, that Washington was going to march the army on the Capitol, on the Congress, and basically install himself as the monarch or the military dictator for life. And Washington doesn't do that. And it's very telling. And I believe that the teachings of Freemasonry probably guided him in that instead is essentially he surrenders power back to Congress and says, I will rule as president if you want me to. And then not only that, but he could have been president for the rest of his life. He wins the first presidency unanimously, and then he wins a second term, and then he could have easily have run for a third or fourth term, but he limits himself. And he basically says two's enough, and let someone else rule it. I mean, and that's really, unheard of. Right, right. Well, the Blue Lodge ritual, the third degree Blue Lodge ritual, is essentially the retelling of the what I would call the dying and resurrected solar god man. Where you call this character Osiris. You will find, a comparative religion study with Christianity, where the character of Hiram Abiff is essentially martyred and resurrected, and the candidate is brought to new life. And you will find the fingerprints of the legend of Osiris from Egypt. You will find the fingerprints of the Christian crucifixion and resurrection story all over the Blue Lodge. It's essentially a retelling of what I call the dying and resurrected sun, solar god man, where the candidate portrays Hiram Abiff. He's eventually murdered. 12 fellow crafts go looking for the body. The body is concealed under the sprig of acacia. That's a symbol sacred to the sun god Apollo. He's eventually resurrected on the grip of the lion's paw. That's a reference to the constellation Leo the lion. Leo is ruled by the sun. The 12 fellow crafts are, of course, the 12 houses of the zodiac going looking for the solar leader, their solar ruler. Think 12 apostles. And the candidate is eventually resurrected. And there's a lot going on regarding Egyptian mythology, Christian, theology. It's really a study in comparative religion tied into this Masonic ritual, where the candidate undergoes this symbolic death and resurrection, where he's brought what I would call it's almost like a Gnostic birth or a Gnostic rebirth, where the old self dies, the new self is reborn, and the candidate is essentially initiated into gnosis. He almost becomes like a Gnostic Christ, where he can now go out and effectuate positive change in the community. That's really what the symbolism of the esoteric symbolism, some of it from the Blue Lodge ritual, what's going on inside of that, that is being done. Many people go through it and really don't see it and understand it. It can just be, viewed as a ritual. But when you start reading the works of people like Manly P. Hall, Albert Mackey, Albert Pike, really some of the godfathers of Masonic esoterica, you'll understand what's going on in these deeper meanings with this ritual, not only in the third degree, but it also carries forward into the high degrees as well.
Robert Riggi, a Peoria, Illinois native, is a psychic medium with over 50 years' experience within the paranormal field, in addition to the 35 years' experience as a forensic psychologist. Robert has been involved in 2 exorcisms, both sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago. Riggi is a mentor of 10 children of the paranormal, instructing them, teaching them in the ways of their gifts and their talents and how to use them most wisely. Robert volunteers at a hospice, ministering to the children and their families, seeing to their needs. He assists these young children in their transition from this earthly dimension to the heavenly dimension. Mr. Riggi's mantra is, "We are all spiritual beings in a physical body." Robert Riggi talks to the children about the angels that are always around them in times of need. All of the services he does are always free of charge. Robert's available for both public and private events. He has given many readings in person as well as over the telephone. Mr. Riggi has been on many podcasts, such as House of Asher, Trapper John Touched by Heaven, as well as several programs in the United Kingdom. If you need any assistance or information concerning anything paranormal, he urges you to please contact him at 309-213-0325.
Right, right. Well, thank you, Steve, for having me on. It's much appreciated. The easiest way to find me is just go to my website. My website is my name. My name is Robert W Sullivan IV. My website is just that. It's robertwsullivan.iv.com. Robert W Sullivan, the letter I, the letter V for the fourth.com. From there are links to purchase the books. They're available on all the major online retailers. You can get the print edition or the ebook. You can, like I said, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million. The site is very easy to navigate. You can go follow me on any of my social media, Facebook, Twitter. I have profiles there. There are links about events and upcoming appearances. Like I said, the page is routinely updated with the events, radio shows, podcasts, things like that. I will be a guest a week from tonight. March 2nd, I will be returning to Coast AM. I've been on that show a couple times before. This will be my 3rd time on Coast to Coast. I've been on with George Norrie twice. This will be on with Richard Syrett. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, I just was on his show. I've been on with him a couple of times as well. So the site is robertwsullivan.iv.com. Links to purchase the books. Like I said, I have 4 books out right now, and they are all available in print edition or the ebook format. And like I said, they are available on all the major online retailers, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. The 4 books are The Royal Arch of Enoch, Cinema Symbolism 2, and A Pact with the Devil. Again, robertwsullivan.iv.com. Links to buy the books, links about me, links about all my upcoming appearances. So by all means, check it out. Right, absolutely. Those are big movies, and those are movies that are overwrought with a lot of esoteric and occult themes and symbolism, and they are very well done on it. That they've incorporated it very well. William Friedkin and Kubrick. The Shining is a gigantic. Excuse me. We'll start with The Exorcist. We'll get into that a little bit. The Exorcist, arguably the greatest horror movie ever made, just really has an entire play on the whole idea of light and dark, heat and cold. I mean, the movie opens in the desert of Iraq, where it's hot out, and it eventually degrades into freezing cold with the demon. And the whole idea of freezing and frigid temperatures with the demon, that comes out of the subconscious mind. With elements, things like with Inferno by Dante Alighieri, where the devil, Lucifer, is in the lowest pit of hell, and it's freezing cold. It's frigid. And that, of course, is what's going on in The Exorcist. When the girl becomes possessed, you can see her breath. It's freezing cold in the room. And that's a great interplay with light and dark and heat and cold going on inside that film. Yeah, no, and then I like it how in the movie they convey that it's winter, that it's cold, that it's no light. There's no sun. It's dark. This is conveyed by when the mother is walking home with the trick-or-treaters, conveying that it's Halloween. Halloween is the midway point between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice, when darkness is exalted and the light is diminished. Therefore, the demons and the evil spirits are free to roam. Kubrick does this exact trick in The Shining as well. When Ullman is explaining to Jack about the hotel, he says that the operating hours are from May to October 30th. And of course, the Torrances arrive on Halloween. This is the day after the hotel is closed and everyone's moving out. So it's the same psychological implant that these directors are implanting in your head, that it's the death of light, coldness is on its way, and this is giving license to darkness, the demons, the ghosts to run free. So that's a great cinematic technique that both Friedkin and Kubrick employ there. I like it how in The Exorcist, the Christ-like savior of the little girl, Karis, if you pay attention to the movie, he's always ascending. He's always walking up steps. He's always in a state of ascent. Even when he comes onto the screen for the first time, he's coming up a flight of subway steps from 33rd Street. That is a clear Jesus reference to the 33 years of Christ's age when he was crucified. So you have the whole idea of Karis being the Christ-like savior of the little girl. But of course, throughout the whole movie, he's doubting his faith. And of course, this is why at the end he falls down the flight of steps. He defeats the demon in the end, but he falls down the flight of steps at the end, signifying his doubt about his own religion. But we know he was successful. When you watch the movie, pay attention to when he's laying there and he's a bloody mess. At the end, you'll see the words pigs spray painted next to him on the wall. That's a reference to the gospel tale of Jesus exorcising the demons, casting them into a herd of pigs, and throwing them up. Oh, yeah. There's the word pig spray painted next to Karis, which is conjuring the gospel tale of Jesus casting out legion into the herd of pigs. So this is your way of knowing subconsciously that the exorcism was a success. Very adroit symbolism there by Friedkin, the director. It's a very overloaded movie with symbolism. I'm touching on a couple things now. Kubrick in The Shining really goes full steam ahead with notions of duality and repetition. Everything is presented in doubles in that movie. And it's repetition. It's everything. It's double. It's everything's happening once. It's happening again. The Overlook Hotel for Kubrick is just nothing but endless recycle, repetition, reincarnation, and you really got to pay attention to it because he buries it quite adroitly in the movie where. It's just everything is doubles. Everything is repetition. There's two sets of twins. There's the little girls, of course, but then when Ullman is showing the Torrances their apartment, he passes another set of twins and says, "Have a nice winter, have a nice break, girls. And it's a set of older twins. There are two boilers. There are two tennis balls. Jack uses two typewriters. There are two mazes, the hedge maze and the maze inside the Overlook, the corridors of the Overlook. Everything is repetition. Everything is presented in doubles. When Torrance is going to the hotel at the beginning, he passes two sets of cars. Two are moving, two are stationary. Numbers repeat. Danny is wearing the number 42 on his T-shirt. Later in the hotel, Danny and his mother are watching The Summer of 42. Scatman Crothers, Dick Halloran, on his license plate is the number 42. This is all being done to connote to your subconscious mind repetition, that everything happened in the past is happening again. Think like a symbolic Ouroboros, a snake biting its tail. It's just an endless, dark, repetitive cycle going on inside the Overlook. Then the number 12 is a number that Kubrick repeats. I'll just end on this. For example, the hotel is KDK-12. Jack throws the ball against the wall 12 times. When Danny and Wendy go into the hedge makes, they take 12 turns. Jack hits the axe with the door 12 times. This is all being implanted by Kubrick in your subconscious mind to denote repetition, reincarnation, that everything is happening again and will always happen again, over and over again. And again, I'm just scratching the surface on some of this. There's a lot more, but that's really what the Shining is all about. Yeah, that's right. It's everything in that movie is doubles and repetition. The number 42. If you the number 237, if you multiply it, you get 42. If you add it together, you get the number 12. Again, these are all numbers that repeat in the film. I'm forgetting some of them right now, just because I need the book. I'd have to prop the book open in front of me. But that movie, The Shining, is nothing but a temple of repetition. And what Kubrick is doing with that is why he's doing that is he's blasting your subconscious mind with these numbers, with this repetition, to convey that the Overlook is this symbolic Ouroboros, a snake biting its tail, a thing that never ends. History's repeating itself, and he does a great job with doing it. It's really expertise at its finest. Well, no, it's just the cinema book, Cinema Symbolism 2 is about movie symbolism. Movies I took on in that ones are like Star Wars, The Matrix, Lord of the Rings, The Exorcist, Back to the Future. You'll find those in Cinema Symbolism. It was such a deep study. I wrote a sequel because I wanted to take on more movies. So in Cinema Symbolism 2, I got into movies such as some of the works of David Lynch. And what's some of the other ones in Cinema Symbolism? The Westerns. And things like that. And then I'm working on Cinema Symbolism 3, where I'm going a whole chapter on like Gnostic Hollywood. And I'm doing movies like Blade Runner again. Blade Runner was a movie I took that one on in the first movie, but I'm revisiting it because I'm doing Blade Runner 2049 and things like that. And then some of the movies that I took on in Cinema Symbolism 2, I took on Suspiria, so I'm taking on the new iteration of that. And then A Pact with the Devil is my first work of fiction. That was actually a story that I dreamt, and I never intended to write fiction or had planned to write a work of fiction, but I dreamt it. I had this very lucid dream back in 2013, and I woke up and I wrote it down. I made notes, and that ultimately became a story that I wrote, and that's out now as well. I'm actually working on a sequel to it and a prequel backstory to it as well that I'm working on as well. But no, that's also something that's out right now. So if you're into fiction, you're into horror movies, or like gothic fiction or something like that, has some erotic elements as well. By all means, check out A Pact with the Devil. But no, the movie books were just really, you could write on it. You write a book about the movie symbolism, then you want to take on more movies, but you can't fit them all in. And then as you're writing Cinema Symbolism 2, you want to even take on more movies, but again, they don't fit in. So I'm actually working on Cinema Symbolism 3 as we speak. Yeah. Right. Sure. Sure, absolutely. The Harry Potter movies are films. These I took on in the cinema book, in Cinema Symbolism 2 book. These were a batch of movies that I was originally doing in the first one, but again, I just was running out of space, and the book would have gone on forever. The Harry Potter movies are akin very much to the Star Wars movies, that they take on. They incorporate loads of the elements of the Campbell monomyth, but they do have symbolisms in their own right. In individual symbolisms. There's some very interesting symbolism revolving Albus Dumbledore. This is what you would call like the Hermes Trismegistus wizard archetype. This is like a parallel with Morpheus or Yoda or Obi-Wan Kenobi or Gandalf. There's a lot going on with him. Some interesting number symbolism with his vault in Sorcerer's Stone with 713. I'll let the person read about that. Black Swan, that's Darren Aronofsky. He's really a master at it. He's akin to Kubrick. And Black Swan is a movie that Black Swan is a movie where every time I watch it, I wind up seeing something new in it. I wrote about it in the first movie book, and then I watched it again and found a whole nother layer of symbolism. So I put it again in Cinema Symbolism 2. And of course, as is pretty much always the case, I watched it again and saw even some newer items, some new things. So I'm going to be talking about it even again in Cinema Symbolism 3. So yeah, I mean, Harry Potter, these are, if you're interested in that, by all means, check out Cinema Symbolism 2. And if you're interested in Black Swan, this is again something that I took on in the first movie book. And I had to take it on again in the second movie book. And I'm actually writing about it again in the third movie book. So yeah, that's a movie that's really overloaded. Very multi-layered movie, Black Swan. Right. I think a lot of these directors, it's a way to incorporate clues to draw on a higher consciousness, modern day mythology making. When I wrote A Pact with the Devil, and even when I'm working on my nonfiction, I incorporate occult elements into the books, codes, things like that. So even I'm guilty of doing it. I think it's a higher level of consciousness. I think it's a lot of mythology making, and I think it makes the movies, the work of art, even much more sublime than these guys, want it to be. I think it's very intentional, and I think it's just a way of transforming their movies into high art, into high mythology. And like I said, I'm guilty of doing it. I incorporate codes and clues in my works as well. So I'm guilty of it as well. And you mentioned a thing interestingly about myself and being in a movie or movie symbolism or something like that. One of the movies that I'm taking on in Cinema Symbolism 3 was a movie called Donnie Darko. And this was a movie. Yeah, well, that was a movie that was not released until 2001. I had never seen it. I had never seen it before. It was a movie that I had loads of people telling me to, whoa, you got to watch the movie. You got to watch the movie. And I finally got around to watching the movie in a few days after New Year's of this year. I watched the movie, I want to say, for the first time around January, maybe 2nd, 3rd, 4th, somewhere in there of this year. And quite honestly, Steve, I was flabbergasted by what I saw, because I felt like I was almost watching a movie that was encoding parts of my life into it. And I was so blown away by this. Not only does it have Gnostic themes in it and Gnostic elements, but I mean, the movie almost seemed to be running parallel with my life at some point. And I was just blown away by this. And I couldn't believe it. It was almost like the movie was echoing parts of my life. I quite didn't understand it. I'm sure I don't even fully understand it right now, but I'm taking it on in Cinema Symbolism 3. And I'm not only doing the esoteric occult breakdown of it, but I'm also relating to how the movie seems to relate to me. Not quite sure why that is, but it is weird. Of course. Manly P. Hall. Yeah, yeah. Well, the pact with the devil story that came to me in a dream, and I've been told that by other people that that was some sort of you tapped into a higher consciousness, and that was a download. Certainly very possible. You're absolutely correct. The Roy Batty character is a Christ archetype. I mean, even there at the end of the movie, I mean, he's the Gnostic savior of Descartes. Rick Descartes, by the way, the name Rick Descartes is a play on the name of Rene Descartes, the French mathematician and philosopher who believed that humans were machines embedded with emotions and souls. So Rick Descartes is a play on Rene Descartes. But I mean, yeah, Roy Batty at the end there, I mean, he's got the stigmata, the nail in his hand. I mean, and he's supplying gnosis to Descartes that replicants have souls. I mean, and then at the end, when he expires, he releases the dove, the Annunciation, the Holy Spirit, as it were, symbolizing that he's gone, and the dove is his soul ascending to heaven. Donnie Darko is quite remarkable, and this was a case where I want people to understand. I'll get into it just briefly, but it wasn't a case where I had seen the movie and then crafted things around the movie. I had never seen it. I had never seen this movie up until a couple months ago. But I mean, there were just things in it that just were echoing with my life that were just so synchronistic and just uncanny. And like, again, I talk about it in Cinema Symbolism 3. And I'll just, I mean, some of the stuff that was really weird is, like I said, this wasn't a case of like I'm Charles Manson and I'm listening to a Beatles song and I think they're sending me messages or anything like that. It wasn't anything like that. It was just these things in the movie that just were going on in my life. I mean, like, for example, I mean, if you're familiar with the movie, the number 8 turns up all over the place in that movie. And that's the movie Donnie Darko is inevitably essentially about time travel. And the number 8 turns up all the time. And if you take the number 8 and turn it sideways, it's the symbol for time space, for space time manipulation. But I mean, just some of the great, crazy coincidences, synchronicities in that movie was, I mean, the one woman, Roberta Sparrow, wrote a book about time travel. I have a book out called Cinema Symbolism, which has the Back to the Future DeLorean in it. On the cover of it, the DeLorean is actually mentioned in the movie, and Sparrow, Roberta Sparrow, RS, my initials, Robert Sullivan, RS, kind of weird. In Donnie Darko, the apocalypse is on October 30th, 1988. October 30th, 1988 is my 18th birthday. Excuse me, was my 17th birthday. Add 1 + 7 to get 8. Just some really weird coincidences going on inside that movie. And like I said, when I first started noticing, I was like, "Oh, come on!" But they really were profound, so much so that I'm writing about it in Cinema Symbolism 3. But I'll also be getting into a lot of the Gnostic and occult symbolism of the movie as well. Thank you for